Good afternoon, guys. Well, thank you. Thanks for tuning back in. Welcome back to Spark to Sport. So like I was saying earlier, for those of you who logged in yesterday, thank you. We really appreciate your support. And for those of you who could not access yesterday's talk with Trevor Woods, all the talks will be recorded and will be available on the UCC Sport website. So yeah, let's face it, things are a little bit weird right now. The difficult times we are facing can lead to uncertainty and fear, but all of those emotions and reactions are a function of our perception. We are currently living through history, and it's up to us to decide if we are seeing it as a crisis or as an opportunity. The bestseller author Robert Greene described this as a dead time versus a lifetime. The only thing that you own is your own time. In moments like this, we can choose to flip our perspective and see this as an unprecedented opportunity to grow. I met today's guest, Ciaran, a couple of months ago for a coffee, and as a French guy, I didn't know his history. But what struck me was not only what he experienced down under playing in Australia, but also the level of resilience he displayed when faced with injuries and unplanned events. And for those of you who do not know Ciaran, there could be some of you out there. Ciaran played underage for Cork in both hurling and football. He was a member of the Cork senior football team from 2010 until 2013, and he lifting the Sam Maguire at the age of 19 years old in 2010. Unfortunately, he tore his cruciate in 2011 in a Munster final for Cork, and in November 2013, he made a move down under and signed for the Australian Football Club, Carlton. He stayed in Australia for nearly 6 years and recently came back to Costa del Cork. So, Ciaran, we made it. Welcome to the webinar, man.
Thanks very much.
Doing?
We got it.
Thanks for your patience, firstly. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Very good. Thanks very much for having me on. Again, apologies about the technical difficulties there we were having, but it's great to be on. I suppose it's as you said there previously, it's uncertain times for everyone at the moment. But the fact that we can, communicate through everything we have available now, be it Zoom, be it Skype, Microsoft Teams, whatever it is, we can still connect with each other. And I think that's really important in a time like this.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I was so keen to have you in this conversation for this webinar is on that conversation that we had a bit of an impact on me. And not only because I think that experience that you described to me, living down under, deciding to leave Cork and go and play for AFL team, and then everything that happened in Australia and coming back and putting on the red jersey again. It's quite an unusual story. To me, it was an incredible story to listen. And what I would like to ask you is, firstly, why did you decide to make that move down under?
Yeah, I guess it was for a range of different reasons. I guess you grow up in Ireland. I grew up in Ireland, always wanting to represent my county, represent Cork at the highest level. And I guess that's all you dream about as a kid. And I guess you push yourself to reach that point. And I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to be involved in a few successful teams within Cork. And, I guess the really special moments that, you hold very close to you for a long time. And I guess I got to a point in my career where a knock came on the door. It was actually the second knock I got in the door. I was approached at the age of 17 to pursue the AFL career as well previously. And I was quite young at the time. All my friends were going to college. They were, starting out their careers, professionally and things like that. So I thought I was missing out if I was leaving the country at that point. And I ended up turning down the contract and staying at home for that time then. Luckily enough, in terms of the sporting side of things, off the back, I was around for that 2010 All-Ireland win. So I look back kind of knowing that it was the right decision at the time. But then when I got the second knock on the door, I guess it was in 2013. And it was after playing in the International Rules Series, and Carlton it was the same club, so Carlton still had that interest. And I guess when I got that second knock on the door, it was almost a sign for me that, this is a great opportunity. I had my college done. I was in a better place, so And look, the move just felt right at the time. I wanted to push myself to kind of new levels, and that's the opportunity that arose.
And so you answered the call, went down under to Melbourne. I believe you were you living in Brunswick at the
Yes.
time? And how was it? How
It
was
was
Brunswick?
amazing. It was amazing. I think that was one of the biggest things that I didn't really factor in. I was really focused on sport and how I was going to, progress that way. But when I look back now and reflect on it, I think about the cultural aspect to, moving to a new country, and Brunswick, which is quite a trendy spot for anyone that's been to Melbourne and been up that side of the city. Really cool spot, great coffee, great food, great culture. And myself and my wife, we really just kind of adapted to the lifestyle quite quickly. And it was our home away from home for 6 years. And as I said, it was a little bit of a culture shock at the beginning, but we certainly really enjoyed it and kind of fell into that bracket of a little bit on the hipster side, but enjoyed our coffee and kind of, it's one of those things that when you go anywhere in the world that's on the scale of the likes of Melbourne or, bigger cities, you kind of just, you could walk down the street and no one kind of bats an eyelid, no one kind of looks at you, or, whereas, and to be honest, that's the great thing about Ireland as well. There's, you have that real sense of community where you might see someone, in a place that you wouldn't expect them to see them. And that's the great thing about that side of it as well. But this was something different for us. And it certainly gave us a kind of a new look at life.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I lived in Australia for a while. I lived in Sydney, and they really embrace this kind of outdoor lifestyle. They have barbecues ready, in the public park. And, it was like, to me as a French guy, it was like, wow, you can barbecue everywhere, which is insane.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like they really cater for that outdoor lifestyle. And again, even the people there, everyone's so outdoorsy. Everyone's real into their fitness and their being out and about all the time. And it was a case of just adapting to that. And look, I think it suited us down to the ground.
Tell me, when you arrived, so you settled in Melbourne and you became professional players in the AFL. You played for 4 years, am I right? Over
Correct.
there. So can you briefly describe, firstly, what was your experience arriving, in a professional environment, professional club, and how did you adapt through the years? What did you go through the years? Because I'm guessing, well, I know it didn't go maybe as planned as you would have liked.
Yes, absolutely. I guess the best way to describe it was, and to help me really settle in early, was we arrived in Melbourne at I think it was around 6 p.m. on a Friday evening, and we were, myself and Ciaran Byrne from Loud, who was another Irish guy that had signed with Carlton as well. We came out on the flight together along with my wife, and then we came in at about 6 p.m. and we were up at 5 a.m. the next morning to run a time trial at 5:30. So
God.
That was a rude awakening to what lay ahead for us in terms of the training and the physical side of things. But adapting to the whole side of it was definitely a challenge. You're jumping from amateur to professional side of things, and I guess the big difference there between your amateur versus professional, you have in the GAA, you train at a professional level. There's no doubt about it. But the benefit from being a professional athlete and having it as your career is you have time. So you have time to work on your physical attributes, but you have time to recover, which is the big thing. That recovery time gives you a chance to really push your limits. And that's what I found was the biggest kind of change all of a sudden. And throughout that 4-year period, look, I made my AFL debut in August of 2014 after playing only 14 games of AFL football as it was. And I found myself the previous year I was playing against Dublin in Croke Park, and then August the next year I'm playing for Carlton Football Club in a whole new sport against a big club in Essendon in front of 60,000 people. So it was almost, everything was kind of a bit surreal to me at the time. I remember thinking, this is all a little bit foreign,
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think in August 2014 when you started, your first was an intercept. And
Yes.
then you kick that ball straight into the center. And What did you experience? Because the stadium was packed.
Yeah, it was an amazing feeling. It's one of those things that the game is so intense that you're not really even thinking in the moment. Things just kind of happen, you know. And I guess the good thing about, you know, Irish guys going out and giving it a go is we're known for our kicks. And the reason for that is, you know, we have a good kicking ability due to the fact that we're being coached by the best coaches from the very start. Whereas, you know, guys are coming up through the ranks in Australia, they probably have different coaches all the way up. They're kicking a bit differently. Whereas we're really taught by the best as soon as we get there, at that more mature age. But yeah, it was a crazy time. The club flew my mom out. We had an amazing, you know, couple of days. Emotions were high, but again, in the back of my mind, you know, Ireland was always there. Football was always there. The club was always there. But at the same time, it was all happening very quickly, you know.
Yeah. So everything's happening for you over there. Your mom is, you know, flown from Ireland to Australia. And you're settling well, you know, in this kind of hipster district, great coffee, great food, all is going well. So tell us, how are things evolving, you know, months after months? How is it after the first year in Carlton?
Yeah, it was, as I said, it was all a bit of a whirlwind that first year. A new game, new coaches, new everything. And at the end of my first year, I was like, this seems really good. I'm on for a good career here.
Living the life.
Things looked up. And then, as things do, there was a few barriers kind of popped up in terms of the performance side of things, and a few injuries popped up. And look, I went out as a bit more mature in terms of I was 23 years of age, which isn't the norm for Irish guys going out to Australia. I know Tommy Walsh from Kerry was in a similar position. He was that much older going out. Not sure if he feels the same, but I think you're a good developmental stage in terms of adapting to a new sport, new movement, everything is between that 17 to 21, 22 years of age, where you really get that improvement. And I felt like I was chasing a bit when I got out there first, and it was just trying to push my body that extra bit too far. And yeah, I ended up getting a few injuries along the way. I had 8 operations in total over my 4 years. And they were just things that I guess they made me find out an awful lot about myself in terms of me off the field. You get really challenged in times like that when you know you can play it and you know you can make it, but you just can't get there. And look, I was very fortunate with the people I had surrounded myself with, my wife, the people at the club, the teammates that I had at the time. I was just very fortunate in that position. And look, as I said, every time, like the best way to learn and the best way to grow is learning from your failures or things that don't quite go your way, you know. So that's what I found, and that's when I look back and reflect on it. I don't think I would change anything.
No, absolutely. Look, the only way to grow is when you have the opportunity to reflect on the failure, on when you're being uncomfortable. Now, when you're telling me that you went through 8 surgeries in the space of 4 years, that's quite unusual. And what was going through your mind? You know, every time you go through a surgery, you do your rehab, everything goes fine. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and suddenly, bam, setback, back to square one again. So what was your process? What was your framework? How did you stay motivated?
It was a simple one for me in the end. I kept coming back to the why, and the why am I doing this? Why am I here? And that always brought back to what my main goal was, and that was to achieve a successful career in Australia. As lonely as it does get in that rehab room on your own, while the team are out training, you always have to kind of reflect and go back to the reasons why you're doing it. And I found that worked for me. Everybody's different, but that certainly worked for me in the respect of, you know, there was always this separation that, you know, when you leave Ireland and you go to Australia, that you're a little bit on your own in terms of you don't have the support you once have or the support network you once have. You have to really create those relationships out in Australia. And you do have that separation feeling where, I went to Australia, I made that decision, I have to find my way here rather than going back and leaning on people back in Ireland because they are so far away. But I think in those times, always come back to the why for me was the way I kind of, give myself that extra bit of motivation. But again, I was very lucky with the people, the teammates. I still have very good friends out in Australia that I will be friends with for life, So, that's how I stayed motivated and kept going through it.
That's why the concept of why is extremely interesting. There's a business speaker, Simon Sinek, I think released recently a book, The Importance of Why. What is the why? And I think nowadays not many people really define their why. They're more in tune with the what and how to do it, but not so much to go down to the core of the why. And so when you made that transition at the end of the 4 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, you worked for 2 years with the AFL on player welfare.
Yeah.
Did you help players to really dig into their why? So firstly, what were you doing? What was the purpose of the job that you had for 2 years?
Yeah, so I found a passion of mine in the player development space. In my time, I guess I was a little bit older when I got to the club, and I was actually we would have had a younger group of first and second year players, and I was probably the oldest in that group. And I took on a little bit of a leadership role in that. I felt it's really important for the younger guys to really develop themselves off the field as well as on the field. And I really kind of garnered a passion for that kind of space. And luckily enough, I fell into this role with the AFL Players Association as the Alumni Programs coordinator. So I was looking after past players specifically. And for guys that were transitioning out of the game and helping them plan their transition out of the game, because that is a huge issue and an ongoing issue in terms of how guys structure up their lives after their footballing careers. And luckily enough, I was involved with the AFL Players Association, who have just amazing people working for them, always putting the player first. And we had programs set up that would help guys and support guys through that transition. We had a lot of programs involved, including injury and hardship funds that would support guys that might have had injuries from their career that are giving them long-term effects. Mm-hmm. And then we had hardship, guys who were really struggling with that transition, who are, hit a tough time in life where, they might have a drug issue, they might have a gambling issue, they might have issues with alcohol, things like that. And we had programs set up where we could support guys both from a welfare point of view, from a financial point of view as well. And that was unbelievably rewarding work for me, and definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things in terms of that player welfare, player development side of things. And I suppose the big one that we kind of launched recently, Brad Fisher, who was actually a former Carlton player as well, who was heading up the alumni department in the AFL Players Association. He was a big influence on launching a lifetime healthcare program, which basically looked after guys with any joint related issues or surgeries that they needed. We reimbursed them a certain sum of money to give them back, to basically understand and support the idea of you should be no worse off coming out of the AFL game, as you go in. So that was our mantra. It was the current players that were putting the money in to support these guys. So current players putting in money to support, themselves inevitably moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, you pointed that right. The transition between professionalism as a pro player, suddenly when you're coming to the end of your career, so many athletes fall into the depth of depression and gambling, addiction, and all that. And it's great to hear about programs like that. Now, with your experience coming back to Ireland, so you made the decision to come back to Ireland for various reasons. You arrived to Ireland and you, at one point, you put on the red jersey again. So from everything that you learned into the player welfare, how can we make things happening in Ireland, and what needs to happen in Ireland to reach more or less the same kind of, it's the same level of welfare here comparing to Australia?
Yeah, it's a funny one because again we come back to the professional versus the amateur status around resourcing and being able to actually put enough time and money as such into that area of player welfare, player development, and I know it's an ongoing challenge, but the biggest thing for me is that awareness, creating that awareness around it and the importance of it. Like for me, that comes first. We are playing a sport. It is essentially a hobby. Now some people won't like me saying that, but it's a hobby that we all take very seriously and love an awful lot. But at the same time, GAA actually in many ways develops you as a person. And I think it's really important to firstly acknowledge that and recognize that, but secondly develop it yourself. So along the way, utilize the resources that are, the GPA, your coaches, former players that would have, played previously that have set up their own businesses, been quite successful, or, are involved in big companies. Because what you'll see is those guys who are former players really want to help out those guys that are currently playing. And it's just a case of, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, where you're sitting outside your comfort zone and you're willing to go and chat to people. And I think that's really important moving forward. I think the GPA are doing a great job. I do think that, creating that awareness and connectivity and having someone, I think, being able to reach that very easily is important. So the ease of actually sitting down and structuring out your time off the field is important.
So let's all your experience of spending 6 years in Australia. If a player, a GAA player, 17, 18 years of age, approach you and say, "Look, I have an offer to go to Australia," what would you say to them?
I think it's anytime. So I've had that happen to me, and I always have a big smile on my face when I hear it, because I think I reflect again on my career very quickly and think, wow, he has an unbelievable opportunity here, he or she, and it's one of those things that if you don't try, I feel like you may regret it. Now, everyone is totally different. Everyone has their own way. So I would never be the person to push anyone in one direction. It's a hard thing to do for a 17, 18-year-old to make that decision. But I think it's something that they would certainly not regret if they do it. I think there is work that needs to be done around the transition from Ireland out to Australia to pursue a career. I think there's a couple of missing things there around, understanding the culture and, understanding your place and what it actually takes to become an elite athlete and be an AFL player at the highest level. I think there's certain camps, that, I think Marty Clark from Down does some great work around, coaching guys and putting them through their paces. But I think the cultural awareness, the understanding visas, for example, understanding, your pension fund, how all that works when you're in a foreign country and how it all, relates back to home, to Ireland, if you do decide to come back,
And when you're talking about the difference between the GAA and the AFL in terms of fitness requirements, now you went from GAA to AFL back to GAA. How would you compare both? I think I remember reading an article of you that said when you came back and the first game that you played, on the GAA, you had to take your breath every couple of strides because the tempo was different. So how would you compare both?
Yeah, absolutely. Very different. Both games have actually, have moved along so much in the space of 6 years. Like GAA before I left, it's changed an awful lot to the GAA now. I remember I used to watch most of the games, watching the Dublin and Mayo All-Ireland final a few years back, and just the intensity compared to the time even when I was playing, 3 or 4 years previous to that. So the game is changing all the time. But certainly I did find myself in a club game, those repeat efforts of up and back, over and across is totally different to your AFL, in more endurance. It is still anaerobic based, but you have a lot of kind of endurance runs, 150-meter runs versus, your short shuttle runs. So it is totally different. It would take time to adapt to it. But yeah, I think I'm getting there. I hope I'm getting there, but it certainly takes you a bit of time.
Yeah, I read an article. I was reading an article this morning I think it was was in an Australian newspaper, was mentioning that now the fitness staff is probably the most important component of an AFL club. Is it what you experienced at the time? I mean, I'm guessing when you went over there, you probably had GPS and probably monitoring and all those kind of stuff. Did you ever use GPS before? Was it a new thing to you?
We had just started to use GPS back in Cork at the time. I remember that. But I think I got a big shock from that high performance side of things when I went out there. We had with Cork at the time, we had some great, we had Aidan O'Connell, who was working with Munster Rugby, who was top class. And there is a bit of a jump up there because you have so many guys again on the high performance team in Australia. It comes back to the resourcing and the money and being able to actually look at every different aspect of how a player moves, how a player lifts, things like that. So like we for example had a right to compete chart where every player was on a list and it was in the middle of our main campus, our main training campus, and basically there was a traffic light system. So in order to compete, in order to get selected, you had to tick all the green boxes. So you had to be green light for so it would be, your weights, all your different weight movements, your running, your times, all that kind of stuff would all have to be on green in order for you to be selected. So you'd find when you come back at the start of preseason, there's a lot of reds. But it's great to see the progress of guys then as you go, like, in terms of your body fat percentage dropping, your performance improving. But it's just that level of, again, it comes back to the resourcing and being able to have that time to put into, meetings with coaches throughout the day, meetings with different people throughout the day. And anyone that's playing a professional sport would understand that side of it as well.
And now, fast forward, 12th of May, 2020, middle of the pandemic. What we don't know when GA will start again. Some people say October. Some people say maybe later. A lot of players are left, today, not knowing. So what would you say to them?
I read a really good article a couple of weeks ago from actually a club mate of mine, Barry Corkery, who was the high performance coach for the minors and under 21s, and he wrote an article basically talking about your well-being in this time and not worrying too much about performance. And that resonated with me a fair bit because after I finished my 4 years at Carlton, I had 2 years of work with the AFL Players Association. But at the same time, I was playing at a semi-pro level with a club which would be similar to your senior club team back home. And I just got to explore things a lot more because my time wasn't taken up by training or I was able to enjoy a Friday beer, for example. And when I read that article, I was like, it's a